Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato.
I'm Rhett Shull.
So today we have microphones in front of us because we are going to be releasing this as a podcast. And so sorry that it's covering up our face a bit, but I think that you guys can deal with it.
You can listen to it in your car now.
There you go. So Rhett, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about things that we both wish we knew when we started in music. You, what, 35 years ago, something like that?
I wish. 40-something years ago. I can't remember. I started in the mid-'70s, probably 42 years ago.
Yeah, and me was probably 17 years ago, 16 years ago. So, yeah.
All right, well, why don't you go first, Rhett? Give me a couple things.
All right, well, so when I started in music, nobody in my family were musicians. I didn't grow up in a musical family at all. I mean, we listened to music a lot, but no musicians, nobody played for a living or even played any instruments. So when I found a guitar at like the age of 12, 13 years old, I basically started the process of learning and teaching myself. And the internet was a thing, but YouTube wasn't really around. And so I just did a lot of listening to records and trying to play what I heard, but never took any lessons, never, there was a lot of styles of music I just wasn't exposed to from an early age.
That explains a lot.
Yeah. And so I think one of the main things I wish I had known or wish I had done when I started out was taking lessons. I wish I had found a really great teacher, someone who was a pro, who had been gigging for years, who could have really showed me the ropes of how to do music for a living. Because I had no concept of, when I was playing guitar as a kid, I didn't even know you really could earn a living from music. I thought it was just something people did for fun,
Yeah, the earning a living thing is not, when I was growing up, nobody even thought about that. That was not even, you saw people that were famous and you figured, oh, they made a lot of money, but nobody thought about making a living unless you were playing in a cover band or you had a record deal or something like that. Just the idea of making a living in music. Most of the people that I knew that made a living in music were music teachers.
Yeah.
That was pretty much the only job you could have as a musician where you would make a living, that you actually knew people that did that. I didn't know anybody that had record deals.
Right. Neither did I. Yeah. The only people I knew that were professional musicians were band directors at my middle school and high school.
I didn't even know anybody that had ever recorded in a studio.
No.
Until honestly the 4-track came out in 79 or so, the Tascam Porta 1, something like that. And I remember going over to some guy's apartment with my punk rock band, the Monroes, maybe it was 78, and recording 4 of our songs. And it was the first time I had ever recorded anything. And then my cousin actually went to school for sound recording at Fredonia State University. And I went there probably 1979, 1980, and recorded a project in an actual studio. And that's the first time I ever set foot in a studio.
What's funny is I just bought a Tascam Porta 2 like last week on eBay.
How much was it?
I think I paid after shipping, it was like $200.
Oh,
and believe it or not, that was actually a good deal around eBay. I'm gonna sit on it for a couple months.
I told you that we had one here.
Yeah, but I couldn't find it. I just tore apart your whole studio basement and couldn't find it.
I told Rhett, I've got one of those, but I said good luck finding it.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is. I know where the box is though.
All right, well, we'll start there after we're
done.
No,
the box has nothing in it.
Oh, of course.
But the box is definitely down here. I've definitely seen it here. Okay, so no lessons. YouTube was around though when you started, right?
Well, no, because I picked up a guitar in 2003, like late 2003, 2004, and I think YouTube really came on the scene in 06, I want to say.
Yeah.
And at the time,
and people, even in 06, people weren't really doing guitar lessons.
Nobody really knew what to do with YouTube in 2006. It's kind of like Twitch is now in the music community. Twitch is sort of where YouTube was 10 years ago when it comes to music. But
one of the guys that I interviewed, who's a great guitarist, Rick Graham, was doing videos on YouTube in 2007. He did it for a year or so, then he stopped and he started again in 2009. But there are definitely people that are still out making videos that were on YouTube at the beginning, but not a lot.
Yeah, and it was definitely not the wealth of information that it is now. I mean, if I was 13, 14 years old now learning guitar, I think I would be much further along musically than I am now at 28 years old, just from being exposed to different types of music at an earlier age. For me, jazz, I had never heard jazz until I was in music school here in Atlanta at 20 years old. And Trey Wright, the head of the jazz guitar department, played us Kind of Blue. And that was my first time listening to jazz. And it opened my mind up to a whole different world of music that I had never listened to. And those like early first 4 or 5 years of playing guitar, which are so important with any instrument. You know, your first 5 years, I think, are kind of the most formative for, you know, where you're going to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
That's interesting. When Rhett and I were discussing this earlier, the first thing that popped into my mind was technical things that I wish that I had done. And one of them is economy picking. Anytime you have an odd number of notes per string, you can go in the same direction. And anytime you have 2 notes in a string, you change direction. That's called the economy picking. That is just about impossible to learn when you have been playing guitar for 45 years.
Yeah.
That sweep picking, things like that. These are things that no one talked about because I didn't know anyone that played like that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I really didn't either. The guys that I knew that played around me when I was in middle school and high school were, you know, either really into the metal scene, which I was never really. I mean, Jimi Hendrix is the reason I picked up a guitar. The first time I heard Red House at like 12 years old, it blew my mind. And so, and even today, listening to that early stuff, Hendrix and Pink Floyd and then John Mayer and all that kind of stuff still really informs my playing today because that's what I listened to when I first started. So yeah, I agree. Like if I had
Rhett, I had lessons and they didn't teach that because no one played like that.
That's why I said I wish I had a really great teacher, someone who was like seasoned.
These guys were great teachers, but they didn't have technique like that. Even the people that had chops when I was learning how to play, that I heard Alan Holdsworth, he played everything legato with hammer-ons, pull-offs. Right. Then I heard Al Di Meola and Steve Morris, and they were alternate pickers.
Yeah.
I don't know if Al Di Meola did sweep picking or not. I don't think of him as being a sweep picker.
I don't either.
He does super fast. He and John McLaughlin do really fast alternate picking.
Right. Which I had never heard until I was in my 20s, which at that point I've been playing guitar for 12 years or so. So, and yeah, you're right. That door sort of closes after a little while. When you're learning any lifelong skill, any instrument, you know, you kind of have, it's like the learning curve, you know, you go through that really steep period of growth where you're learning a lot in a short amount of time. And then as it starts to level out, which for me was probably 5 or 6 years into playing, it just gets harder. It's
almost impossible to change your technique at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. My technique is baked in at this point.
Yeah. You develop habits like that. That being said, I don't know if my technique's as good as it was when I was playing every day, you know, around 1990 and practicing all the time. And I was in my 20s, but it's with a couple weeks of practice every day. If I practice 2 hours a day, I'd have better chops than I've ever had.
Yeah.
I can play. I know more things to play. That's the thing. Even if I went 20 years without really playing the guitar, which I pretty much did when I was producing. I mean, I would play little bit parts, but I wouldn't practice and play solos or anything like that.
Yeah.
Nothing that needed chops.
Yeah. And I think to me, that's another thing I wish I had known when I'd started playing professionally. So I went to music school here in Atlanta and was there for a year, did the program in a year, and then graduated and started playing. And I met you not long after that. But when I went to music school, I went from being completely self-taught, never having any lessons or any kind of structured practice routine, to a really intense program of studying all different. I mean, I didn't even really know what a major scale was when I started. And so I had a lot of holes in my knowledge. And so what that did was that year of rigorous training, I came out of school and into trying to play and gig and be in bands and record, thinking I had to know how to do all these super complex, okay, I've got to know sweep picking and I have to know how to improvise in all my modes or else I'm never going to get hired for a gig. And it took me kind of the first 2 or 3 years to sort of not unlearn all that stuff, but to realize that that's not necessarily what pays the bills. That's not going to land you a gig. And so that's one thing I wish I had known too, getting back to just having a really great teacher who was experienced in playing out and touring and gigging to tell you like, okay, these are the things that you really need to know. You need to understand Nashville number system. You need to understand how to mic an amp. You need to understand tone. You need to understand your triads up and down the neck.
Yeah. See, out of that entire list, there's one thing that, knowing your triads up and down the neck, no one talked about miking amps because nobody did their own recording. No one talked about, what were the other ones?
I
was listening to them and I said, no, we didn't have to know that. No one talked about that. No one talked about any of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
triads up and down the neck, definitely. This was more about playing and playing by ear.
Yeah.
People always talk to me about music theory. Rick, you always talk about music theory. You know about this stuff. It's I learned music theory after I learned how to play. When I was trying to teach other people.
Yeah.
That's when you have to actually know music theory. But I'll tell you a little story that when I went to college, I could not read very well. I
read music.
Yeah. I got into college and I was a bass major and my ear was so good at the time. I don't mean I'm bragging. I had a good ear and I would learn a piece from listening to it. I'd listen to a record of it or just hear what other people were playing and I would figure out what the notes were.
Yeah.
And just memorize it. So I remember went into my sight singing final 2 semesters into college, and this Mr. Stevenson, the sight singing teacher, he did I always got 100 on the oral exams, listening, writing down things like that, notation. But he had me sight read this thing, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And he said, "What? How can you not do this?" I said, "I don't read very well." And he said, "You got to be kidding me. You're in your 4th semester. I've had you in classes before." And he said, you can't get out of music school if you can't pass this class. And I said, I've done everything by ear. And he said, all right, if you promise me that you'll work on this on your own, then I'm going to pass you. And I said, okay. And so he passed me. So I went and studied with a freshman piano. This is always the thing. I got into college taking lessons with a freshman guitar player, and I learned how to read music with a freshman piano player. Mm-hmm. This kid, Tim Newton, who actually happens to be he's a college professor now. He was one of the only kids that had perfect pitch, and he was a great reader, and he would sit down in the practice rooms and help me with my reading.
Yeah.
And I was a sophomore, and he was a freshman, I believe it was. And here he was, a freshman, was helping me with my reading. It's unbelievable.
I had a really similar experience in music school, actually. I don't think we've ever talked about this. I had an almost identical experience. I was horrible at reading. And Steve Rick, who's a great guitar player here in town, was one of my teachers, and he taught reading. And my second or third quarter in AIM, I had a sight reading test with Steve and just failed miserably, like didn't make it through the first 2 bars and just couldn't do it. And we had a similar thing. He's like, "You got to be kidding me. You've been here for, almost a year at this point." I was like, "Man, I just can't." And I did the same thing because my entire time of learning guitar up to that point had been playing completely by ear. Guitar tabs were around. You had, the websites and everything, but I learned pretty quickly that you can't trust guitar tabs online because they're 90% of the time completely
You couldn't
wrong.
trust them in magazines either.
Yeah, they were just wrong. And so I learned how to play by ear. And so I had a good ear as well going. And that's still how I work mainly today, is playing mostly by ear. And getting back to the theory thing, I'm kind of the same way. I learned theory after I learned how to play. And the way that I like to think about theory is it's just a way of communicating with people. Right. It's like understanding grammar and vocabulary. If you have a great vocabulary and a great sense of grammar, it doesn't mean that you can write a great novel. You still have to have something to say. Conversely, if you have a great idea and a great story, but you don't know how to communicate it effectively, you're not going to get that story out. So that's how I like to think about theory, is that it's a necessary way of communicating with people, with other musicians, but understanding theory inside and out is not going to inherently make you a great player.
So I've said this before on episodes. They didn't have tab I mean, they had tab. There's tab and lute music,
Right.
from the 17th century, but we didn't have tab and guitar magazines. Go back to magazines in the 70s. That tab started happening probably around 1980 or so. You started seeing it appear in Guitar Player and magazines like that, and you had to be able to read. Now, I could figure things out. I when I said I couldn't read, I couldn't sight read well.
Yeah.
But I could read, and I could figure out notes and rhythms and things like that if I had time to work it out.
Right.
Which is typically in orchestra. That's how I would learn on the bass. I mean, I'd have to bring the stuff home and actually look at it.
And at that point, the music's just serving as like a point of reference for you, right? Because you essentially memorize the piece.
Exactly.
You're just,
Exactly. So another thing for me that I wish that I had done, but it's really not through any fault of my own, is I wish I had taken piano lessons. I didn't have a piano because we couldn't afford a piano. And that's, that's the reason. It's not that my parents didn't want to give us piano lessons. We didn't have we lived in a very small house. We didn't have room for a piano, even if we did. We had 9 people in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. We did not have room for a piano.
Yeah.
I don't think our house was more than 1,200 square feet or so, 3 bedrooms, 9 people. Mm-hmm. And I remember we got a piano the day I left for college, something like that. My brother, John, my youngest brother, I was the second youngest. He got to take piano lessons. I learned in the practice rooms at college. I taught myself. I never took a piano lesson, and I practiced all the time. I loved having a piano, and I just wish that I had taken piano lessons when I was a kid. That's that if I had to do one thing over, I don't have any regrets in my life. If I could had one do over, I would do that. I would have taken piano lessons from the time I was 4 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. I would probably say the same thing. Although I love drums, and I wish I could play drums. And that's one of those things that you have to develop really good limb independence as a drummer. You have to start young. All the best drummers I know, all my friends who are incredible drummers, have been playing since 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, something like that, So I wish I would have played that from an early age, and piano as well, but just in order to help my guitar playing out, and to help me develop more melodic ideas and understanding chord structures and things like that a little better. Piano is incredibly useful for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the drumming part, obviously we didn't have room for a drum set either. I played with drummers in high school, but unless you had a drum set sitting around, we couldn't practice at our house. So I never really got to play the drums until I bought drum sets when I was a producer.
Yeah.
And I had them here, and I've got 10 of them or so in the, a couple rooms over. But, I learned how to play basic beats, but I really learned how to program drums. I knew what the drummer should play. That was the big thing. And I know what the drums should sound like. I know how to tune them. I know how they're constructed.
Yep.
Everything about the drums.
Yeah.
I was, from doing so many sessions. Mm-hmm. That's a really, really big thing. I was thinking about sayings that my parents had when we were talking about this particular subject. And one of them that my dad used to say was, "Figure it out for yourself, Rick. I'm not going to be around forever." That was one of his favorite sayings. He always encouraged me to, I'd ask him a question and he would tell me to figure it out for myself. I'd ask him for his advice, and his thing was always make your own decisions. I never had a bedtime. I never had to be in at a certain time, which is why I was a D student in high school. My parents let me have tremendous independence. But when I went to college, I was incredibly disciplined because I didn't feel like I had lived a life under their thumb at that point. I felt like, I've been able to do anything I wanted to. And having that freedom is incredible for a kid. And when it comes time to buckle down, I buckled down.
Yeah. I did not.
Red is the opposite.
I'm the complete opposite. My parents weren't helicopter parents or anything like that, but they definitely were more structured and more rigid, I think, than your parents were. And so when I went to college, I had the opposite. I never partied or any of that kind of stuff. I was in school in the mountains of North Georgia, and so I was whitewater kayaking and rock climbing all day, every day, pretty much. And left my first year of college. I only did 1 year of college, and I think my GPA when I left my freshman year was below a 1.0. It was like a 0.7 or 0.8 something. It was so bad that the college sent a letter home after my freshman year saying, your parents' money is no good here. You can't come back. So one thing for me that I actually am glad I got into pretty early on was the recording and producing stuff, which I actually have you to thank for that. I was,
Finally.
Yeah, finally.
Finally.
I think at like 20.
I'm always crediting Rhett for helping me out, starting my channel and everything.
Yeah, well,
finally,
you heard it here first.
Finally, it comes out.
You heard it here first. Yeah, I think I was like 22 years old when I first came to the studio. And this was the first time I had ever set foot in any kind of recording studio at all. I came with a friend of mine who I was playing with at the time, who you were going to produce the record. And we came and toured the studio, and I was just walking around here with my eyes wide open, like, whoa, that's a tape machine. And look at all these amps and all these guitars and stuff. So not long after we finished that record, I asked you and Ken, the assistant, can I start coming to hang out? And that turned into an internship. And I must have spent, 3 years, something like that, interning down here. And that's where I think for me, my music education kind of really happened when I was here, working in this studio and working on records and playing on records. I think this is where I really learned how to play guitar, because I've played, I don't know how many sessions down here that bands would come in and I would track either while they were here or when they would leave. I'd go and
you would do things that I had gotten to that point in my career where I didn't want to play any more parts. Yeah. I had played on so many records, replayed parts, or done overdubs that people, just. They weren't bands that weren't capable with coming up with auxiliary parts, you would call them. They do their basic tracks, but when you're making a record, you need other parts that make the recordings interesting. And those parts are more esoteric to come up with, but yet they are the things that glue the recordings together, make them interesting. Some people use the term ear candy. I hate that term personally.
Yeah.
But so I would say to Rhett, hey, why don't you play guitar on this? And he would say, well, what do you want me to play? I said, well, find a good sound and play something good.
and I
figure it out for yourself.
I pretty much only had 2 takes, because if I couldn't do it in 2 takes, just give me the guitar, I'll play it. So that's the
2 take. That's the Beato 2-take rule.
Yeah. So
they call me 2-take Beato. No, I would do 1 take though, but no, I would give people 2 takes to get something. If they weren't on track to coming up with something good,
yeah,
I'd have to rip the instrument from them and play it myself.
But that was really valuable because it taught me to think on my feet. And it gave me a lot of confidence in a recording studio, which is something that I think is really important for players to learn nowadays, because the reality is if you're going to be a musician, a working musician today, you have to know so much more than just playing your instrument. You have to know how to engineer. You have to know how to record. You have to know production techniques. You have to know how to write, because it's so much harder, in my experience, to make a good living from just playing gigs and touring. You really have to have all these different irons in the fire. And so for me, it was incredibly valuable to spend those years down here in this basement learning this stuff and playing on these records, because now I feel really confident walking into almost any studio situation, because if you can track for Rick Beato, I feel like you can track for just about anybody,
the obviously it was quite opposite with me growing up, since we didn't have these recording opportunities. And you played with a click. When you would practice, you'd have the metronome doing that.
Yeah.
And there was no electronic metronomes. This didn't start happening until you had them, but you couldn't afford them really. That you'd have them when you were in college. Classrooms would have them. They'd have the ones that plugged in. And they wouldn't do they would go, a couple beats here, maybe 4 beats between tempo markings. And you couldn't do, now they have metronomes that do polyrhythms. I mean, they've crazy.
Right.
They have all these crazy metronomes, but the ability to play in the studio, to play with a click track is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays where everything is played, all grooves are all quantized for the most part.
Oh yeah. If you can't, and especially in a live situation, if you can't play with a click track and play with backing tracks, or if a drummer on top of that, if you don't know how to run Ableton,
right,
you're not gonna work in a lot of situations, especially around Atlanta and Nashville and LA. Most of that stuff is so dependent on you being able to play with clicks and tracks and in-ears and all that kind of stuff.
That's a real skill too, is to be able to play with a click track, play good parts in time. That's something that I never thought about. For me, it's similar to when I played in bands. I was always the guy that couldn't hook up any gear. If the PA was unhooked when I got to the practice space, it stayed unhooked until the guys that knew how to hook up the PA got there, because I could not plug in a mic. I could not run a console, little small monitor board or anything like that. I did not know how to do that. It wasn't until I started producing, and a very good friend of mine, Donald Jones, one day, I remember this back in 1999 or so, and I went out to this restaurant with him, and I said, "All right, Donald, please explain to me signal flow." And I told him before we were going to go to this place that he was going to explain signal flow to me. And he laughed. Donald's a few years older than me, and is just a great. I've been wanting to get him on an episode. Do you know Donald at all?
No.
Oh, he's an amazing guy. Super, super smart. Taught me a lot about engineering. Really interesting person too. So he comes there. We're at the brick store down in Decatur.
Oh yeah, man.
So we're sitting there, and I said, "All right, Donald. I'm the dumb guy that doesn't know anything here. Just give it to me just pretend I'm 10 years old or so, and baby language."
Right.
And so he would draw diagrams, and okay, here's your microphone. It goes in here into the mic pre, and he went through, and I said, "Well, what if you want to put a compressor in? What is a bus?" I mean, I would ask questions like that. What is a bus? I mean, it
Wait, and how old were you when?
Oh man, I was 37.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy.
37, learning this stuff for the first time. Yeah. And then within 2 years, I could run SSL consoles. I worked on Neves. I never even thought about it. It became second nature. And I was working in studios all the time, so I used every piece of gear you can imagine. And I would always use new pieces of gear, outboard gear I'm talking about at the time. I would use them because I wanted to get familiar. And I would go to specific studios that had pieces of gear that other places didn't have. I mean, if you go to Blackbird in Nashville, for example, and you say, I mean, they have everything there. So you say, "Hey, I want a Helios 760 compressor. Do you have a pair of those?" Of course we do. We have 10 pairs of them because they have 10 pairs of everything there.
Right.
And, any esoteric piece of gear that you can think of, they have there. And it's great. That's the way you use these things. So when all the plug-in versions came out of things, Neve 1080-81s, Neve 1073s, Neve 1066s, Neve 1084s, then you could compare them because you actually had the experience. You knew what an 1176 was because you'd used them a million times. An LA2A, an LA3A, an 1178. So when plug-in versions of any of these things came out, Lexicon 480L, I know that reverb. Does this sound like that reverb? Nah, it doesn't sound like that reverb to me.
Right.
And as computers got faster and faster, you started getting better versions of these things.
Well, nowadays too, it's kind of the opposite. Everybody's learning, myself included for the most part. I mean, you have a lot of great outboard gear here as well, but for me learning, I've learned pretty much everything in the box. And so I have come up on these plugins, and I'm used to how these plugins react and sound. And so for me, getting my hands on actual outboard gear is kind of a rare privilege. And I certainly don't have an SSL console or anything that I have, easy access to learn on. If you want that, you still have to go down to Tree Sound and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate that I started when I did, because it was during the transition. I mean, I produced my first record in around 95 or so. And once again, these were always engineered. Up until 99 or 2000, they were engineered by other people. And I would have to rely on them. I'd say, oh, this sound needs more low mid-range. This needs more. I mean, I knew what I heard.
Yeah.
I could say, oh, the kick drum. I would use words like, it's not puffy enough. I didn't say... I didn't say, oh, it needs more 60 hertz, or it needs more 2K on the attack or 3K. I would say it needs to be puffy. It needs to have more click. And I remember my buddy Billy Hume that I was doing records with, and Billy would always, he was great because he would, is it puffy enough? He would be serious though.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know. It needs a little more. Oh, there's some plosives that we'll get rid of right there. That's not good. So those are the kind of things, and working with, I started on tape, and then you went from where you do tape and then have Pro Tools running, locked with with time code, and do your vocals on Pro Tools, and then eventually you went to all Pro Tools.
Yeah.
Because we realized how valuable Pro Tools was for vocal editing. Yeah,
and I've learned pretty much exclusively on Pro Tools, both here and on my own stuff and the stuff I do for my YouTube channel and everything.
I thought you did on Logic.
No, I came up on Pro Tools, and I just recently got into Logic. And I when I'm producing music or writing stuff, I do it in Logic, but I still prefer Pro Tools because that's what I learned on. And I still feel faster in Pro Tools. I can edit faster. I can mix more effectively and quicker in Pro Tools. But the reason I bought the Tascam, the Porta O2, is because I want to start learning tape techniques and recording.
I told Rhett that that's not a good thing to do to learn tape because it's going to sound crappy. It's going to be all distorted.
And I have an old Ampex ATR 700, like a 2-track reel-to-reel, but needs some work, So, and I'm just kind of dipping my feet into it now. But yeah, you had the advantage.
You're welcome to take my tape machine if you want and use it for, it only weighs 428 pounds.
Don't threaten me. I'll actually load that thing up in the truck and take it home.
That was quite difficult to get in here in the studio.
Yeah. I'm sure I could get it.
I think we had 4 people. We had 4 people that lifted it because the control room here is a floating floor, and it's up probably about 4 inches or so. And to lift over 400 pounds, I mean, it has 4 handles on it. You had one person, 4 people on these handles.
I'll figure it out. It'll be easy.
Tough.
Be worth it to get a tape machine.
But these are things the things that I didn't learn. I didn't know I was going to need to learn those things because none of them had been invented yet. So these are things that I learned as an adult, and not as a young adult even. I mean, you're fortunate to have come into this earlier in life, but there's a lot of people in a lot of the producers out there even today that produce a lot of records are people that are my age, maybe a little younger, and some older.
Yeah.
That came up, that started on tape and then made the crossover to Pro Tools or Logic or whatever DAW they use. Ableton. And you had to learn all these things one at a time. You had to learn every plugin. I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plugins. I have every plugin that you could pretty much imagine between my 2 systems. And I was just, anytime I had some extra money, I would buy plugins. Mm-hmm. I just would. You'd find them on sale. You used to be able to buy them off eBay at a discount from people. I don't know if people. That. Oh yeah. Oh, I used to buy plugins all the time.
Like people would resell plugins.
Yes, they'd sell the licenses and you transfer them via iLock.
Wow.
I would buy plugins on eBay all the time back in the early 2000s.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
Before my time.
$25 for something that would maybe cost $300.
Yeah.
You get for $25 or $100. I don't know how much it would be. And then they do an iLock transfer.
That's fascinating to me that they would charge that much less because it's not like there's any wear and tear on your plugin. It's not like it needs to have maintenance done to it or something like you would on a tape machine.
No, but people didn't want to spend money. I don't know why. It's so weird. People used to have the boxes, and that was the thing. It comes with the box with the actual program on a CD-ROM. I mean, that was kind of important to people at the time, not realizing, hey, wait a minute. You didn't really transfer things like that. You weren't emailing things over the internet, these programs. So you'd actually have to send them out. Eventually you would just do the iLock transfer and then you download the plugin.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I bought a physical piece of software.
Yeah, well, when you start it, you'll see them all over in the.
I know. I was just digging through all the boxes. I know they're all.
Yeah, I've got every version of Pro Tools you can imagine. I have all those plugins that I have they all are on CD-ROMs.
Yeah, yeah.
And now they don't even come in machines anymore. So these things are, as far as things I wish that I had known about, getting back to that, the recording part, I wish that I was exposed to that earlier for sure. Or when I was first exposed to it, I wish I had paid attention to it, because I was in studios a lot starting in the 80s, and I just never, ever thought about how you mic'd an amp. It just didn't interest me. I don't know why. It's weird when I'm so fascinated by it now.
Right. And I'm sure there's things that I'm doing that with today too. It's like, I don't need to know that, whatever.
Well, you never actually realize the things that you need to know at the time. That's the benefit of looking back on them and realizing it, or even typing, like I can't type. So what am I going to do?
Hindsight being 20/20 and all.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm sure there's things that I'm skipping over today that are going to be crucially important some point in the future, but you can't just live your life that way, trying to constantly speculate like, okay, do I need to,
right here, case in point, video editing.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to run a camera until you set it up for me. I still don't know.
To be fair, you still call me to set it up, so I don't know if you know
I call a rep
yet.
from Germany. Hey, what's my frame rate supposed to be? Somebody screwed around with my camera here.
Today, before we started recording this podcast, I had to change a setting, but it's all good.
I actually filmed Rhett. I've only made about 600 videos. I actually filmed Rhett to show me how to change the frame rate on my camera.
I mean, look, dude, it's not like you have missed out on any success on the YouTube platform so far because your shutter speed has been set at the wrong setting for 600 videos.
But we don't really know. See, people would come in and set up my camera, and then it would just stay like that.
Yeah.
And if somebody would come in and just turn one of the knobs on it, I would not know what to do. And then I'd call Rhett. Hey, it's on M or it's on V or something. It used to be on M, didn't it?
Well, if anybody watches the channel, anytime there's been major changes in the look of Rick's videos, it's because I've been over here and I'll be like watching one of his videos and be like, oh man, the white balance is so wrong on that. Next time I'm over there, I'm going to fix it. And just without telling him, I'll go over and change the camera, and then he'll call me, dude, it looks so much better. What happened? I was like, oh yeah, I changed the ISO and the white balance.
Well, it's kind of, I was telling Rhett last night, my daughter Layla, I was eating some potato chips and having a conversation with my wife and not paying attention. And then next thing I know, I eat this chip and I go, my daughter Layla, my 5-year-old, came and put a ghost pepper chip in the when I wasn't looking in the potato chip thing. I was thinking, I thought she was getting some potato chips out, but she stuck a ghost pepper chip in. And I was...
That's brutal, man.
That was brutal. I started sneezing and I was like, what is going on with this? And she's
Layla.
laughing. So there you go. That's kind of like me not knowing if somebody messing around with my camera. All of a sudden, my videos look terrible for a few days.
That's diabolical, man.
That's it for today. If you want to subscribe to Rhett's channel, the link will be in the description below. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and you can buy the Beato book on my website, or you can become a member of the Beato Club. The Beato Club has things like extra PDFs, more lessons, live streams weekly. You can check out info on that on my website as well. Thanks, Rhett.
Thanks, man.
All right. See you guys later.